Welcome to the Snyder Report podcast. I am your host, Gary Snyder. Before we get to our guest, which you can, maybe see next to me here, we need to thank our sponsors. First up is Robin Winston. Thank you, Robin. He has been with us from the start on the newsletter and the podcast, so thank you, Robin. Up next is former Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson. Her newest book, Across the Aisle, Where Bipartisanship Works for America. You can get that anywhere books are sold. Two-term governor and former two-term U.S. Senator Evan Bayh. So thank you, Senator Bayh, for your sponsorship. Congressman Andre Carson, a longtime sponsor of the newsletter, now joining us over here on the podcast. State Representative Cherish Pryor. Thank you, Cherish, for your support. And State Senator Greg Taylor. Thank you, Senator Taylor, for all that you do for us in support of this podcast. My guest today is Dr. Michael Hicks. Dr. Hicks, welcome.
Good to be with you.
That was a long list. I'm out of breath already. I need to get in better shape just to read the sponsorships. I wanted to bring you on today because your article this week went back and looked at your predictions from about 3 months ago. And according to you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I have been a couple times in my life, you're saying that we are headed for a recession or already in a recession?
Yeah, I think we're in a recession. If I'm wrong, I've missed it by a month or two. So I think we started a recession in March, maybe start May 1st. It really depends on several factors. And we won't know formally or technically for a few months until the Business Cycle Dating Committee of the National Bureau of Economic Research meets and picks a day. But for Hoosiers, it will certainly feel like a recession by the July 4th weekend.
Now, I believe that was it March or April, GDP was actually down nationally.
Yeah, U.S. GDP was down for first quarter. And what's interesting about that, it was really driven by declining business investment and less consumption, a small amount, 0.3%. And so that almost all of that was concentrated in the third month of the quarter. So we had a pretty bad March, which I think is going to be enough to cause this business cycle dating committee to pick that as the start date. But, if I'm off a month or two, it doesn't really matter unless you're looking at the data. You'll feel it by midsummer.
Now, does that look nationally or just at Indiana? And if it's nationally, how does Indiana usually go when it comes to a national recession? Usually worse, better?
The recession's national. If states go through the experience of a recession at different periods of time. Actually, a friend of mine did his doctoral dissertation on the 36-month spread of a typical business cycle. It really depends on how the business cycle comes about. A recession, if it's a financial crash and a housing market crash like we saw in 2007, 2008, that comes to Indiana pretty late. It was already hitting California, New York, Florida a year before we started feeling the pain. And then we didn't really get clobbered badly until after the financial market crash of 2008. If it's a supply shock from an oil crisis, that affects us pretty quickly, like we saw in the early 70s. Or if it's a tariff, it's going to hit us right away because we're the most manufacturing intensive state. About 15th, 17th most agricultural dependent state. Together, we're the most manufacturing ag dependent. And of course, that's where the tariffs and the retaliation are going to hit. So the forecast I talked about was for us specifically.
So this is I guess, a tariff-driven recession, or it will be, in your opinion?
No, absolutely. If you look at the way the economy looked in the morning of January 20th, the tariffs on Indiana were about 0.8%. And these are taxes, 0.8% of our manufacturing GDP. And we were moving along. Our manufacturing gross domestic product in inflation adjusted terms peaked in the previous quarter. So we were burning all cylinders. Unemployment rate was 4.1%. That morning of January 20th was fine. The afternoon of January 20th, we saw our first tariff announcement. Which was really, we're going to move to tariffs in the next few weeks. By April 2nd, the big tariff increase Our average taxes here went from 0.8% to 22% of
Wow.
our manufacturing GDP. But just to put that in context, that's about 19 billion dollars, which is the state's total general fund revenue for this year is going to be about $20 billion. So it's the far and away the biggest manufacturing or household tax in the history of the republic. On April 9th, the day the president got appropriately spooked by the bond market, he shifted the mix of those taxes, but it didn't change the overall rate for Hoosier manufacturing firms, stayed at about 22%, $19 billion. And then yesterday, capitulation day, that dropped to $14 billion. So just to put that in context, on January 20th, manufacturing firms in Indiana, their total tax burden, state, local, and federal, was about $2.7 billion on imports and on their production. It's $14.1 billion today. It's a 700% increase in taxes on Indiana's factories that they'll eat some of that. Most of that's going to be transmitted to households. The estimates of Yale Budget Lab are that the average family is going to face about now a $2,500 additional annual cost this year over the rest of the year. That's about 3.3% of income for the average Hoosier family. That's just effectively evaporated because of tariffs.
You just called it capitulation day. Could you explain that real quick?
Right. So President Trump went to China trying to spook them, trying to get them to change what he called non-tariff barriers, which, just so people know, a non-tariff barrier is something like a subsidy to manufacturing or agriculture. We ought to be very careful about that because no industry in the world is as heavily subsidized as American farms. So we're the biggest non-tariff barrier to entry anywhere is domestic farming. And so whatever his goals of this tariff, which you got to pick one, they're contradictory. We talk about that later. He had 145% tariff on China. That was spooking everybody but financial markets who knew, I think, because the Treasury Secretary said we're going to eliminate these tariffs at some point, really caused terrible slowdown in the port of Washington. The SeaTac port was closed, essentially had no traffic in it. We were about to start closing factories and shuttering part of the port of Long Beach this week. And he rescinded taxes. He took it down from 145 to a 30% baseline, up from 10% on January 20th. Importantly, though, there's a 178-page list of products with about 40 products per page that still have another 25% tariff. And most of the manufactured imports, in fact, most of the consumer items that we would get at a big box store or order through Amazon, are still facing that 25% tariff. So the average tariff for products that are bought by Hoosier manufacturers are more like 55%. And we got China essentially didn't change anything. They lowered their barriers a little bit. We export far less to China than they export to us. And so it was really a reversal of these tariffs, which have been the center part of his campaign for the presidency since he descended the golden elevator in March of 2015.
Dr. Hicks, can you hold through the break?
Yes.
You're listening to the Snyder Report podcast. I'm Gary Snyder. We'll be back in a minute.
It's rock and roll. It's racing. It's Miller Lite Carb Day. Co-headlined by the All-American Rejects and Bret Michael. Friday, May 23rd at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Following the final Indy 500 practice and the Pit Stop Challenge. Concert, pit, and VIP tickets available now at ims.com.
Welcome back to the Snyder Report podcast. I'm your host, Gary Snyder. We are speaking with Dr. Michael Hicks from Ball State University. We are talking tariffs. So when you left, you were talking about Capitulation Day. I heard this, I guess, talked about some of the talking heads on TV. And they said that this 30% tariff is actually a lot worse than the 145% tariff, because at 145, there's nothing to buy. At 30%, you're buying it, you're just paying more now.
Right. That's part of the complexity of this. I think you're absolutely right. At 145% tariff, that might as well be an embargo. We might as well have the Japanese Navy closing the port of Long Beach and SeaTac, which are the two big Western ports that import from China. At 30%, and so what that would have done would have caused empty shelves for fireworks. Most of those are probably already been imported, but a lot of higher prices, empty shelves for fireworks, no Christmas or Thanksgiving or
Just $2 instead of
tchotchkes
30.
for Halloween. Right, $2 if you're lucky. But there's not going to be any Halloween costumes at 145%. Now they're all going to be 30 to 55% higher as they're available. So it's it's better for consumers to have the option to buy something expensive than not buy it. That's more choice is always better. But at the end of the day, it makes it tough for businesses. How much do I bother importing? Do I take a risk importing? The uncertainty of this, which I think is what most people are going to say, actually makes this worse. So a big part of the problem isn't just this historically unprecedented increase in taxes. A big portion of the problem is that this imposes enormous uncertainty. So now, if I'm a manufacturer, this tariff reduction doesn't come into play until tomorrow at midnight. Do I wait? Do I order quickly, hoping the product can be delivered within 90 days? Is Donald Trump going to change his mind within 90 days? Because in the previous 90-day period, he's changed his mind 3 times. And so if China says something snarky, is he going to now reinstate this higher tariff rate? So do I, as a small business, or even a big, Walmart's margins 3 to 4%. They can't, if they order $15 billion worth of Halloween and Christmas toys or presents from China, and the tariff goes from 4 billion on that up to 20 billion, which is what it would have been last week. That they can't sell that stuff, and they've lost that customer. So this is a very volatile period of uncertainty that makes it more difficult to onshore domestic manufacturing. It makes it harder to maintain those supply relationships. It breaks down the connection between the retailer and the domestic manufacturer, because you don't know what you can get delivered, because you don't know what's going to be interrupted by this. The word I'm searching for that's family friendly is bizarre.
Well, you also put out your forecasts, revised forecast for economic growth for the Indiana economy, and you had it growing basically at 2.1 to 2.2% for the year. Your revised has it a negative 1.5 in the second quarter, negative 2.8 in the third quarter, and a negative 4.1, which again is recession. Now, we do this podcast now at the kitchen. You can see it right behind us. How does that affect Hoosiers, working Hoosiers that are sitting around that kitchen table trying to figure out how they're paying bills, how they're eating, how they're buying their prescriptions?
In a bunch of different ways. The first obvious way is the Yale Budget Lab estimate of about $2,500 more per family. So nobody's the average family, but because that includes, do you need to buy a car this year? Because you got to buy a car this year. It's probably $3,000 more for a Toyota Corolla, a sort of entry-level sedan. A lot more if you're buying a $50,000 Ford F-150. So if you're not buying a car, you're just buying groceries, clothes, you got to replace the microwave. You got to buy a new weed whacker. That's probably going to run you $2,500. So a typical family, the extra cost of these in clothing and other consumables is a big wallop to your pocketbook. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to see, what can I wait to buy next year? I'm driving a 2008 domestically manufactured Honda Pilot. I'm going to wait a couple of years to replace that now 17-year-old car because I don't want to hit it right in the middle of tariffs. And so that's the first kitchen table issue. The second one is, some of us, a lot of us, are going to lose jobs. We're going to get either fewer hours. We're going to see factories as early as this week having to close down assembly lines for a week or two.
And we're already seeing that with the RV industry up in the north.
Correct. I mean, they just don't have parts to assemble. They can't afford to pay people to sit around. Maybe Stellantis will be able to do that, but most places that don't have parts or aren't able to deliver completed parts because either the orders are stalled because car company says, look, you don't need to ship me anything because I can't complete this car and sell it. I'm just going to idle everybody for a few weeks. So that's number two. There are a lot of people, and that's going to spread. It's not just going to be limited to a few manufacturing firms. Then those folks aren't going to go out to eat. So you're going to see fewer hours for people working in retail and restaurants and amusement facilities. Tax dollars are going to be down this year across the board. We saw yesterday $51 million under forecast, under the already dismal forecast for April. So that's already beginning to impact state and local governments. And so everybody's going to have to tighten their belt just a little bit on the income side and the spending side. And then you start getting some other things. Well, this has hurt equities. We've had a rally in the last couple of days. There's a lot of hopium floating around the stock market. But if you're hoping to pay for your kids' college next year, your 529 fund is way down. It's going to be harder to get them there. It's going to be more expensive to rent places because, rents are going to go up simply because it costs more to replace a building. Auto insurance rates are going to go up. It's going to be more expensive to repair an automobile or fix your home. Our auto manufacturing is going to be down, of course, but also new home building is going to be down. We're seeing sinking demand for existing homes around the country because college students are getting their job offers rescinded. New jobs aren't being fleshed out. People aren't moving. And so new sales are down around the hot markets in the country. That'll come to Indiana this summer. And the problem is, at the same time as the value of the existing stock drops and the inventory rises, the cost of building a new home is going to go up because we're tariffing all those parts from China and Canada that are big imported parts for manufacturing a home. And so that's going to impact, your high school junior who wants to work in the construction industry this summer or wants to be a lifeguard. So across the board, families are feeling the wallop of this. And I think we've been deluded by the fact that we haven't seen it in the aggregate statistics. The aggregate statistics will start showing at the end of May, early June, and then very heavily in July and August, even at the current tariff reductions.
I promised you a short interview. Anything else you want to cover before we let you run?
No, I mean, I hope I'm wrong about all this. And the fact of the matter is, I haven't talked to another economist. I haven't seen one on social media who really believes this gets us out of recession territory. For Indiana, though, it doesn't matter. It's really bad. It's a major shock to our domestic manufacturers. If they're going to have to cut production because Hoosiers and non-Hoosiers aren't going to buy the cars and the RVs that we're making at anywhere near the rates they did last year because of the price differences. They're going to have to pass those price differences on to consumers. And I think it's an unfortunate self-own by the United States. We're in a trade war with 188 countries, and 188 countries are in a trade war with one country. We don't have the capacity to do this, either negotiation or just economic capacity. It's a real tragedy.
Well, thank you for your time today. Before we go, we do need to thank our sponsors. Again, Robin Winston, a sponsor from the start on both the newsletter and the podcast. We have former Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson, her newest book, Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. Get out and get that book anywhere you get your books. Congressman Andre Carson, former two-term senator and two-term governor Evan Bayh, We have State Representative Cherish Pryor and State Senator Greg Taylor, all of them. Thank you for your support that makes this happen. Hit that subscribe button below. Like this podcast and also leave us a comment. Tell us what you think. I'm Gary Snyder. He is not. He is Dr. Michael Hicks. This is the Snyder Report, and we are out.